Hey, what's up, guys? I'm so excited to be with you here tonight at All Out Students, Calvary Church. Man, I love your pastors. I love your leaders there so much. Pastor Tommy and Nora, some of the greatest people in the world. And if you ever go to Fort Worth, I love going there because they'll take you to get some of the best food in the world. And then Pastor Anthony and Aaron Moorhead, I love them. Some of the greatest youth pastors. Pastor Anthony took me one time and to Urban Outfitters and told me to get whatever I wanted. I don't know if he told Aaron about that, but I love them so much. Love little Xander Winston. And then, of course, who could forget the man, Manny Gonzalez, such an amazing leader, an amazing friend. And so I'm so excited to be with you guys tonight. I'm excited about what God's going to speak to us. You know, I believe that most, if not all of our problems in life come from a lack of identity, not knowing who we are. Maybe that's not knowing what we're supposed to do with our future, if we're supposed to go to college or just start a career right away, or maybe confusion about our sexuality or confusion about does God exist or does God not exist. I believe that all of this comes down to an issue of identity. And so that's why I want to talk to you just for a few minutes on the topic identity issues. You know, if you're like me, you've probably had some identity issues in life. I can remember one time specifically when I was going from middle school to high school, and I know a lot of you are kind of in that time right now, and if you've been through that time, you know that from middle school to high school, things kind of change. Your friends groups kind of change. Maybe the people that you hang around and maybe the things that you do start to change. And so I kind of went from being a skater kid, you know, dressing a certain way, having a long haircut and dressing just kind of different from everyone else, to when I was in high school, kind of started to get a little bit more like everyone else, kind of started to dress a little bit nicer, got a haircut, all these sort of things. And so one of the things that I wanted to do to finally kind of fit into that crowd is I wanted to get a pair of Nike Air Maxes. Now I know today Nikes, and especially Nike Air Maxes, aren't really that big of a deal, but then it was a huge deal to have these Nikes. And so I did what every freshman does when they want something. I go to mom and dad because I didn't have any money. And so I go and I'm like, Mom, Dad, you know, I really want these shoes. These are the only shoes that you have to buy me all year long. I'm going to wear them every day. I promise. I'm going to clean them. Like, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. And so they asked me, like, okay, well, you know, how much are they? And just like we do a lot of times, I kind of try to skirt around the question a little bit. I'm like, well, you know, why don't we just go to the store and just kind of check them out, and then we'll see what the price is. And they're like, hey, no, Alex, how much do they cost? Tell us. And I was like, well, you know, I think they're like $119, something like that. You know, my voice starts to crack a little bit, and they're like, no, there's no way we're gonna buy you these $119 tennis shoes. So they gave me a certain amount, and they're like, hey, if you want to spend this amount of money on tennis shoes, have at it. Like, whatever you can find for that, that's what you can get. And so I looked around, and I finally found a pair and bought them, and they were all black tennis shoes, Champions brand from Target. I mean, these things, I just thought they were good. They weren't as great. They weren't as great as Air Maxes, but they were pretty nice. And so I wore them to school, and I was kind of excited. You know, I had a new pair of tennis shoes, and I was all excited. And a guy came up to me. He's like, hey, what kind of shoes are those? And I can remember so clearly. I looked him dead in the eye, and I said, they're Nike Special Editions. And I just walked off. I didn't tell him special edition of what. I just said they're Nike Special Editions. Just straight lied to the guy. One of the only times in my life where I can remember just straight lying to someone. And as I thought about that, I thought about how my identity was wrapped up in that pair of shoes. My identity was wrapped up in what I looked like and what people thought of me. And I knew that if I had that cool pair of shoes, that maybe people would think more highly of me, or that people would like me more. And so I think we all have stories like this in our life. Maybe for you, it's not the way you dress, but maybe it's how many people you date, or how many Instagram followers you have, or how much people like your art, or whatever it may be. We all have these stories of where we have an identity crisis or issues with our identity. But I'm so thankful that just like everything else that happens in our life, anytime we have an issue, anytime we have a problem, anytime we have a struggle, that the Bible always speaks to it. The Bible always has a solution for our struggle. And so today I want to talk to you a little bit about Peter. Now, if you've been in church, you've probably heard of Peter. He was a disciple of Jesus. He went on to be an apostle and an early church father. But Peter started out as a fisherman. And in this day and age that he lived, kind of what you did was your identity. You didn't really get to choose what you wanted to do. You would just do what you were told to do. And so his father was a fisherman, and then he passed the business down to Peter, and then Peter was probably going to pass it down to his children. And then one day, this teacher comes along named Jesus, and Jesus says, "Hey, Peter, why don't you come and follow me and be fishers of men? Why don't you come follow me and be a disciple of Jesus?" And so Jesus goes, and Peter leaves behind his business and becomes a follower of Jesus. And over the next couple of years, we read about through the 4 Gospels that they see so many miracles and so many amazing things happen. And then towards the end of the story of Jesus' life on earth, we see that Jesus is arrested and that he's taken and starts to be beaten, and that we know he's going to be crucified very soon. And at this point, Peter kind of leaves Jesus. He kind of goes into the crowd. He steps back a little bit. And people even ask him, they're like, "Aren't you a follower of Jesus? Aren't you one of those disciples? We've seen you traveling with him before." And 3 times he emphatically says, "No, I'm not a disciple of Jesus. I'm not his friend." One time he even curses and says that he is not a follower of Jesus. And so he goes from being a disciple to being a deserter. He leaves Jesus. Peter, who was one of the closest disciples to Jesus, one of Jesus' best friends while he was on earth, leaves him. Says, "I never knew that guy. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't understand why this is happening, and I'm just done." So how does he go from being this disciple, this friend of Jesus, to leaving Jesus and actually going back and being a fisherman? Well, I think it was because he had his identity wrapped up in the things that he was doing. He had his identity wrapped up in traveling with Jesus and working with Jesus and kind of doing miracles and teachings and seeing all these great things happen. And then when he saw Jesus about to be crucified, he thought it was all over. See, Peter found his identity in the things of Jesus, but not the hope of Jesus. Because if he would have understood the hope of Jesus, he would have understood that even though Jesus is going to go through a horrible beating and crucifixion, a death on the cross, that he's going to rise again and have a hope and give life so that everyone can have eternal life through him. But Peter didn't seem to understand this. He went back to what he was doing before. He didn't realize this, that your identity is not what you do, it's who you are. So Peter's identity, his entire life was what he did. He was a fisherman because he fished. That's what he did. And he was a disciple because he had followed Jesus and been with Jesus. But then when Jesus died, in Peter's eyes, he thought that was all over. And I think it's so interesting in our lives, how often does something happen where it seems like things are all over? The hopes that you had, the dreams that you had, whatever it may have been, it seems like it's crumbling down. And how often when that happens do we go exactly back to what we were doing before, where we found our identity before? Maybe you were following Jesus for a while and then something happens, something bad happens, and then you step back and say, "I don't really want to be a part of this anymore." So you go back to wherever you found your identity. Maybe for you it was a certain person who wasn't healthy for you, but they make you feel good, so you go back to that person, or maybe you go back to an addiction that you had before. Whatever it may be, we go back to these things that are comfortable for us. But it's so amazing that Peter's story doesn't end there, and I don't think any of our stories should end there either. After Jesus is buried in the ground, we know that he rises again 3 days later, and he actually appears to Peter. Peter's out fishing again. It's very similar to the first time that they met. And Jesus comes out and they start having breakfast. And man, it's always good when you can have breakfast with somebody. That's how you know you're really good friends. And so they're having breakfast, and Jesus is essentially telling Peter that he's going to be a pastor, that he's going to be a preacher. He's letting Peter know who he really is, not what he's doing, not the things that he's done in the past. He doesn't remind him of his past failures. He doesn't remind him of the times that he denied Jesus. But he says, "Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep." And so it's so cool to me to see that even though Peter had messed up, and even though Jesus could have just let him go back and be a fisherman, be like, well, he messed things up. I guess he wants to really be a fisherman, so I'm just going to let him do that. Jesus reminds him of his true identity. And his true identity is not about what he did. It's about who he was. and he was a child of God. Just like I believe myself and you all are children of God. John 1, verse 10 through 12 says this: He came into the very world he created, talking about Jesus coming to earth, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed in him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. So for all of us that believe in him and accept him, we become children of God. So whatever identity we had before, whatever you placed your identity in and your hope in, all of those things become second to that you are a child of God. See, your identity crisis is solved when you surrender to Jesus. Everything that you're going through, the problems might not end. The hardship that you're going through may not end. But finding your identity and your identity crisis will be solved when you truly surrender to Jesus. Just like Peter did when he finally said, I get it, I understand now that it's not about what I do, but it's about who I am in Christ, that I'm a child of God. Peter goes on to write a couple letters that become books in the New Testament. And this is what I want to close with tonight. This is Peter's letter. It's 1 Peter 2, verses 9 through 10. And he says, But you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are a royal priest, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as a people. Now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, but now you have received God's mercy. So tonight, if you don't get anything else, just remember that once we had no identity, or maybe we had a false identity, maybe we didn't truly understand who we were, maybe we placed our identity in things that left us brokenhearted and left us empty on the inside. But now, because of the hope found in Jesus, we have God's identity. We are God's people. And that tonight, if you've never done it before, or maybe you have and you just need to accept it again, that tonight you can receive God's mercy, which is never ending. Why don't we bow our heads as a leader comes forward to pray over us?